let's look at Genesis 4 and pick up from there. We will have to cruise to catch up to finish 11 by the end of the day. Next week, I think you were asking how much to read. I assume that on Tuesday we'll discuss Abraham. On Tuesday we'll discuss. Oh yeah, next week is. Yeah, Tuesday will be Abraham and Thursday will be Jacob. So roughly, read up to 35 or whatever, and then read to 50 by the end. And then we'll just split from there. Correct me if I'm wrong, we do not have class on the 10th. Is that right?
Correct.
For
no
preview
morning
day?
Class for the preview day.
Okay. So that is the week
No
of.
class, but still stuff happening on.
What about next Monday for Labor Day?
We don't have class.
We don't have a Labor Day? Okay.
Well, we don't have class on Monday, so
Yeah.
it doesn't really affect us.
I just didn't know. if we
So
had a
next
holiday
week will be
or-
the rest of Genesis. The week after that will be Exodus. I will still want 2 days for Exodus. So we will probably do Thursday, I guess the 12th, and then the following Tuesday will be for Exodus. And then we'll probably just have 1 week for like one day for either Leviticus or Numbers is gonna have to get cut to 1 day. So I know we're all deeply saddened that we won't have 2 full days of the book of Numbers. But that's kind of my plan. So we might be off on the lectures from where we are online because of that day missing. And I don't want to cut Exodus because I feel like there's a lot in there to condense into an hour and a half. So that is my plan. Any questions about any administrative, online, anything? Good? Okay. So let's start off with Genesis 4. We've got 2 characters that pop up after Adam and Eve. Cain seems to be working the ground. I wonder if reading this we're supposed to think negatively of him as one who works the ground, which was just so recently cursed, right? I wonder if we're supposed to go into it thinking he's not going to get it. I don't know. It appears that this is the beginning of what we're going to see throughout the rest of Torah, throughout the rest of the Old Testament, where the older brother is not the chosen one, the well-respected one, the one who receives the blessings from God, right? Which is supposed to be how it works in all ancient cultures, right? Judaism writ large throws a wrench into that. It is almost always Abel and not Cain, Isaac and not Ishmael, etc., 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 right? Jacob and not Esau, right? Most of the main figures are not the firstborn son who's supposed to take over, right? The blessing from Israel, from Jacob, goes to his fourth-born son, right? And then the text clearly tells us that his most beloved sons are his 11th and 12th, right? And we see this over and over and over. David has, 4 or 5 older brothers? He's the one who's chosen. This is the beginning of that. This is where we see that first play out. The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but he didn't have regard for Cain and his offering. What are they offering? I don't mean like what in terms of like physically what they're offering. What are they doing?
Sacrifice to God?
Right, where does that come from? Right, like we haven't seen that before.
Yeah.
That's a new thing. And God has not instituted any sort of sacrificial system. It might come from Adam. It might come from, God continuing to work with them. We don't know. They're offering something. It doesn't appear to be like an offering of, hey, I committed this sin and I'm going to, put this pigeon forward in an act of repentance. It seems to be more, I've collected my first fruits and here's the tithe, right? Why is Abel's regarded and Cain's is not?
Gave a sheep or a lamb.
Let's see what does the text describe as the 4:3. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. Is it really just like the word firstborn that makes the difference? Like Abel is offering the best and Cain is just offering something?
Because I was thinking, like, did Cain, it doesn't specify that Cain offered, like, the first of his crops.
Right.
Which is probably what would have made the offering, but it does specify that Abel brought his firstborn.
Mm-hmm.
What about where it says offering of the fruit of the ground? Could it mean like stuff that is fallen and he's,
No, I think it means like because he's someone who works the ground.
yeah,
He describes him in 2 as Cain, a worker of the ground. I think that just means that he's a farmer as opposed to a shepherd. Again, shepherds, ding, 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 right? Always going to be a big shepherds, again, generally not well respected in the community. Shepherds tend to get pretty good positions in the story in the Old Testament. I mean, I think we all think of David immediately, but we'll see that frequently, even before David, of shepherds taking prominent roles that they're otherwise not supposed to. Abel here is doing that as well. It seems like Cain is a farmer, working hard, as we've just seen, because the land is not willing to give up its crop anymore. It's not as easy to be a farmer or a gardener. I wonder if verse 7 gives us the answer. God is talking to Cain and he says, "Why are you angry? Why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you don't do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you and you must rule over it." I wonder if that gives us an answer of maybe he didn't do what was right somehow. God is saying, if you do what's right, won't you be accepted? So maybe somehow his offering, he knew that it was inadequate. He knew that it was falling short somehow. Or this could have nothing to do with it. This could be God talking about the future. You have a choice now to do well or not. And if you choose poorly, sin is crouching at the door to get a hold of you. Go ahead.
so being that this is so close to Adam and Eve, this is how it says, and God said, "Why are you angry?" And how did God say? Was he in a physical form? Was it a megaphone?
Yeah.
You know, how is he having a conversation with God?
Yeah.
Is God in a physical form walking? Because he walked with Adam in the cool of the day,
Right.
and came out looking for them.
Yeah.
Now he's even here, he's having this conversation. How are they doing
Yeah.
that?
That's a good point, because we assume in the garden, Adam and Eve, as perfect created beings, can be in the presence of God, right? In a way that we cannot. Everybody since then, it falls on their face when they realize they're in the presence of God, saying like, "Oh, I shouldn't be here, I'm gonna die," right? After the fall, it seems like they shouldn't be able to be in the presence of God anymore. So I don't know, I wonder if this is, they're bringing up their offerings, they're like, I think they probably like have them in a bowl and light them on fire or something, and they're praying. And maybe God is speaking to them through their prayers, like through their, like in their minds, God is speaking to them. But the Bible does not clear.
When
It
you're
does not clear
talking about where Eden was, and it said that Adam walked with God in the cool of the day. So
Yeah.
I mean, you had to see him in a physical form that we can't.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere separate.
Yeah.
It's not a place.
This does not seem like God is walking around. At least in this interaction, in the story with Noah, it doesn't seem like he's walking around. Although the Tower of Babel, it says God is going to like come down to look to see what's going on. Not clear what that means either.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, this mandate from Lord about if you do what's right, sin is crouching at the door, it's very, very clear what he's saying.
What's that?
It's not like Cain saw something and intuited that this is what God was saying. It's like Cain got that point.
Yes. Like the Lord is actually speaking.
Right.
Yes.
You know,
it's not an impression on his heart or whatever
exactly.
words
It's
we
not
use.
like, oh, did I interpret
Yes.
the dream right or
Right.
something,
Right.
It seems very, like, this is the deal.
Yes. And when the Bible tells us that God is saying something, it means that God is saying something. It does not mean kind of the loose language that we use. Because if you tell me God told you something, then like you're claiming, being a prophet. And if you're wrong, then like Bible says you should be stoned because you're blaspheming against God, right? So we try not to use that language so much. So we try to soften it with like, I had this impression on my heart, or God is stirring me, or leading me toward this, or whatever. The Bible is saying God said this, which we can take to mean, if I'm wrong, kill me,
Right.
right?
And then, that wasn't quite my question.
Okay.
And then God in physical form comes, I mean, you have Abraham and the whole conversation of the three messengers and talking about Sodom and da-da-da, you know, there's this whole very clear conversation. Is the burning bush the first time that God pushes back
It
on,
doesn't appear
on
in
his
human form.
holiness and human?
Yeah, it is curious why he would appear to Abraham as a person and not to Moses as a person, right? Why he
Well,
would appear to
I mean-
Moses as a burning bush and not.
Maybe to make, I mean, the burning bush
Okay.
says so much about who he is.
Mhm.
I mean, there's so much of his character in the, and you know, you kind of go, I mean, obviously he speaks to all of us as we need to be spoken to, but is the burning bush the first time that we see that holiness pushing back at, you need to create a space?
I don't know, because I think Jacob has interactions like that as well.
Wrestles with him, right?
Right, he wrestles with him, but then there's also like, he leaves a monolith, he leaves a
Right, he leaves
marker
an ark that-
because, oh, this place is holy, we're gonna remember this. You don't have like the take your shoes off, you shouldn't tread here, like you have with
Well, and I
Moses.
just wondered if that helps Moses to then later understand the the space of the tabernacle. Like, is that because he's gonna be leading such a big group of people that they're gonna have to know God's holy in order to get the point?
Yeah, I don't know, but we'll get to it when we get there. Go ahead.
I have a question. In this, are we supposed to assume that Cain and Abel know right from wrong? Because it introduces the word sin. And it says, he comes in and says, if you don't do right, you'll sin. So they need to know right from wrong?
I
Because as
assume
far
so.
as this, the only other one was Eve eating the apple.
Right, which is no longer a rule,
Right,
because they don't have access to it.
right. So how do they know?
Good question.
That's a really good question.
We have this issue throughout Genesis 1 through 11. We have no idea how much time is passing,
Yeah.
right? It says in verse 1, Adam and Eve knew each other, conceived and had a kid, and then had another kid. At least a year has gone by, we assume, between Cain and Abel. Abel became a shepherd, Cain a farmer. I mean, like, at least 15 years has passed between verse 1 and verse 2, right? We have no idea what is actually occurring, or how much time is actually passing, or how these people are aging. None of it is very clear. It does seem like if God can come down and say, if you do well, won't you be accepted, that there is some sort of set standard of rules. Whether it's laid down by Adam to his sons or from God himself, we have no idea. But it does seem like there's a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes that we're not given
Yeah.
the
I mean,
information.
up until Moses gives the Ten Commandments, there's really no real rules, of
Yeah.
right and wrong.
Also, look at the very end of verse 7. Sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. This sounds like almost identical to 3:16, the curse against Eve. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Right? We have the same idea of desire for power and being ruled or ruling over as a response to that. Some sort of combative nature. For Cain, it's that sin desires to rule over him, but he should become a master of it. And in the same, curse or whatever against Eve, we see the same sort of warning, the same sort of description. Make sense? The language is supposed to be repetitive enough that it's supposed to clue us in, right? Let's see. Abel doesn't do or say anything. The only thing he offers the offering. The story's about Cain. God never speaks to Abel, at least in the story, right? Abel doesn't say anything when Cain takes him out to kill him. Nothing ever happens. His blood cries out, I think, right? Abel never says anything. This is another theme that we need to keep in mind of which characters are actually participating in these stories and which characters are in the background or like used as props. Isaac kind of fills that same sort of. Isaac is in the story for 10 chapters, 15 chapters, and very rarely is he like the main character doing things, right? Seems like that's what's happening with Abel here. So, Cain and Abel go out for a walk. It does not end well. The Lord comes and asks, "Where is Abel, your brother?" Same sort of question of God coming and finding Adam and Eve and asking, "Where are you?"
Yeah.
Right? Does God know what has happened at this point before he asks?
Yes.
The Lord says, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground." So, the ground is cursed in Genesis 3. Cain, despite that, continues and chooses to be a farmer, it seems. It doesn't seem like it's out of necessity. If you can be a shepherd and live that way. Now, Cain is cursed from the ground, right? The ground had opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood, whereas before, the idea is that the ground would open its mouth to release food for you to eat. And instead of taking care of that, instead of doing what you were supposed to do in your proper interactions with the ground, you poured blood into it, right? You ruined it, and now it's ruined for you, right? When you work the ground, it will not yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain seems to say, I don't know, it reads very much like, "Why don't you just kill me? My punishment is greater than I can bear. You have driven me today away from the ground, my source of identity and food," right? "And from your face I shall be hidden," which I think we would all say is probably the biggest punishment. Doesn't seem like Cain is factoring it that way. "I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer in the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me." Right? I'm going to be a vagabond. I'm going to be useless. I'm not going to contribute. If somebody comes across me, they're going to kill me. What does this imply? Whoever finds me will kill me.
Well, it implies that there's other people out there that could kill him.
Right.
You know?
So we know of 4 characters. Adam, Eve, Cain, Abel. Abel is now dead. If somebody finds him, Cain is worried somebody's going to kill him.
Yeah.
Is he worried he's going to run into his dad and his dad's going to kill him? Right? Even if at this point Adam and Eve have had other children, they would also know who Cain is, and presumably in 10 minutes they're going to know what Cain did. So what is he worried about? It doesn't really tell us. The Lord says, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him 7-fold. The Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him." What does that mean?
Well, it would have had to be something with universal significance and, easily interpreted and seen, and like there had to be like
Right.
the universal significance is kind of the hard part.
A
Like,
big red X on his forehead or something?
Yeah.
A Harry Potter mark.
That's right.
Yes.
everybody's
Yeah,
got to
yeah,
know
appreciate
what that means.
Yeah. Scholars, both Jewish and Christian, have been, I don't want to say thinking about it, they've been playing with this for centuries, right? Because nobody knows. There's theories that it's like a letter, a Hebrew letter placed on his head, probably presumably like a bad letter. There's theories that he was, the mark was not a physical mark on his body, but that he was given a dog as a companion, and dogs are not viewed well. Oh, if you see that guy who's running around with a dog, stay away from him. Don't kill him. This is like a prevalent Jewish theory. Dark skin is also a prevalent theory, that the mark was not just on his forehead, it was his whole body was stained, and you can see the negative ramifications of that for centuries. In America, Protestants decided that the mark of Cain was dark skin. Eventually, we learn about Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Ham is cursed, Canaan is cursed. In that theory, a descendant of Cain, who now has this dark skin, marries a descendant of Ham. Or a descendant of Cain married Ham, and their child, Canaan, is cursed to be a servant of all the others. So here you've got the dark skin, there you've got cursed to be a servant. Therefore, for 300 years in American Christianity, it was black folks are cursed by God to be servants of all people. It says so right here, right? We would all say, well, that's a pretty big leap. Several big leaps in a row, right?
That was the fanatic curse, right? We talked about that in theology too.
Right.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah,
say
right.
that was the book.
But it starts
Yeah.
back here. It starts back here though.
Yeah.
We did talk about that, but we focus on the Ham aspect of it,
Yeah.
of Ham being cursed, I guess it's Canaan being cursed, to be a servant of all. This is where you get the mark on the skin, which for them was like a physical coloration, not just what we tend to picture of like some kind of distortion, some sort of blemish, something on his forehead. They argued the mark of Cain was dark complexion, right? That everybody else looked the same, and now Cain looks different because he's darker, brown or black or whatever. Go ahead.
Geographically, wouldn't they just be naturally darker?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. But I mean, it's the difference in a Middle Eastern person and an African person, right? I mean, that would be the difference for them. Would be, we're all brown, there's one black guy running around, therefore we know it's Cain, right? So we're gonna stay away from him. That's the theory that they're presenting, is that this was a distinguishment of what we would call ethnicity, right, or race. We'll talk about that more when we get to after the flood. Go ahead.
For like the mark, I found it interesting that you said that people always thought like it was a bad or a negative thing. Because before you even were talking about that, I was thinking about it, and I was like, what if it was like not necessarily a bad thing, but it was like a mark like of the Lord, where like someone could like tell that like, okay, the Lord doesn't want anyone to kill this guy. Like don't, yeah, like
Like a
don't kill this
protection.
man. Yeah, like a protection almost. Like that's how I was thinking of it.
Yep.
Like God in His mercy, like protecting like Cain and being like, go attack him, or
Right.
else like I'm going to like take vengeance on you.
So there's two things at play. One, why isn't Cain killed immediately?
Yeah.
Right? We will see in the next couple chapters, after the flood, God does lay out some rules in Genesis 9. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God has made man in his own image. So because people are created in the image of God, someone who kills another person forfeits his life. Right? We see this a lot in the Old Testament. Why is Cain allowed to live? Right? And then we see not just is God not killing him, God is doing something actively to protect anyone else from killing him. Saying, it's not just, I don't want you to kill him. If you kill him, you'll get 7 times the punishment that I've stored for him. Right? It seems like the living is part of the punishment for Cain. When he starts off and despairs of his life, all of this stuff that you've done, my identity is gone, I've killed my brother, so my brother's gone, I'm alienated from the rest of my family now, I'm alienated from God, right? He's hiding his face from me, and I don't have any way to procure food or money or however the system works, right? Everything is gone, just kill me, right? And God says no. That's not how it's gonna work. I'm not gonna kill you, and I'm not gonna let anybody else kill you. It seems like it's part of the punishment, right? But we don't know anything else about it,
Isn't
right?
anything that says how long Cain lives, is there?
There might be, because don't we get descendants of Cain listed here?
We do get descendants of Cain, but
But not dates.
I didn't know,
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, there's
So Cain meets a wife somewhere. He settles in the land of Nod, so there is another land with another name that already exists. We only know 3 people. There's another land with another name. Don't know what that means. It very much could be it's that he settles in the land of Nod 1,000 years from now, right? We just have no idea of the passage of time. Or it could be he goes out toward Nod because it exists. We have no idea. We have these generations. So Cain, Enoch, all these people, I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce them. Your book plays up on this guy, Lamech, because he's the 7th in the generations. And he is supposed to be compared to Enoch, who's going to be the 7th in the generations from Seth. This guy is super bad, and Enoch is super good. That's supposed to be, he is given a speaking role, and Enoch is also a main character, a prevalent character, more so than the other guys who we don't know anything about. There's also Cain has an Enoch in his line. Seth has a Lamech in his line, right? So it's supposed to be playing on these different ideas. Verse 25, Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and named him Seth, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed Abel. Seth is very clearly chronologued after the death of Abel, right? We don't know about any of Adam and Eve's other children before this. We assume they had other children. We don't know if they were before or after Cain kills Abel, or if they're before or after Seth. We have no way of knowing. Seth had a kid, and at that time people began to call upon the name of the Lord at the end of chapter 4. Any questions on 4?
Yeah, why do they word 25 like, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son?
Yeah, I always wondered about that too.
About what?
How it says, and Adam knew his wife again, K-N-E-W.
Uh-huh.
I know what they mean,
Uh-huh.
but why do they put it in that form?
I mean, like, why are they using the...
Word
Like
knew.
his, I was wondering about why they did.
I mean, it's, what's the word? It's a euphemism, right? So, like, they're having sex,
Yeah,
but instead of saying sex, they're using the euphemism of,
but when they said Cain,
knowing each other.
when Cain got the nod, he knew his wife.
yes?
So it sounds like he knew her from before and has known her, and she was in nod when he got there.
There's two different versions of knowing, right? So one of them is just like acknowledging who people are, and then there's the euphemism for sex, right? So here, Adam knew his wife again clearly means that they're having relations, as opposed to like he acknowledges her existence. It's not just that he knows who she is. It is playing on that. We just don't have other words in English for different levels of knowing. Other languages have to know facts about something versus to have like an intimate relationship with something. They have different words for knowledge in that sense, and we just put no for all of them. Is that what you're asking?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. It was curious because they used it twice in
Everybody
the
is-
section and it meant two different things. So,
Everybody is going to say the same. It's going to say no
Yeah.
throughout. But yeah, I mean, like in 17, Cain knew his wife, and then what happens immediately after the knowing? She conceived a son.
Yeah.
So the knowing always leads to children. So in that sense, we know what they're talking about. It's just a euphemism for married relations. Go ahead.
Does verse 16 imply that Eden is still around? Because it says that they went east of Eden, but like, I don't know, like could they
Yeah.
still see it? Was it a spiritual, physical? What does that mean?
I take it to mean wherever they're camped right outside of Eden. Right? At this point, they probably know, oh, if I go back that way a day, it's right there. Whether or not it still actually is, they're using it as a geographical marker.
And when they
But
say
we do
we're-
know at some point it doesn't really exist anymore, right? Between then and now, it doesn't exist in our sphere. Go ahead.
So, I know it's not really important, but to me in this chapter, I've always been like, what the heck is up with Lamech? Or Lamech, I don't know, I don't
Yeah.
wanna say his name.
However you say
But
it.
what is he talking about?
Killing
I
a
killed a
man.
man for wounding me, a young man for striking me, if Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. Like what,
He's
Is
talking
he
about
saying,
himself in
like-
third person too.
Yeah.
is he talking about like, okay, so like, I guess if someone kills me, then their revenge is gonna be 77-fold, or is he talking about like I have, like revenge was put on me because like I killed someone? Is he saying that he killed Cain? I don't think so.
No.
I'm so confused.
It seems like he is escalating the sin in the line of Cain.
Okay.
So Cain had a wife. Lamech is the first person to take multiple wives. Cain killed a guy and received 7 times the punishment.
Okay.
Lamech killed a guy and once 77 times the punishment. He seems to be like arrogantly announcing, bragging about his sin. Whereas Cain seemed to be more repentant. I don't know if repentant is sorrowful at least.
Yeah.
Lamech here is supposed to be the magnification of the sin, the display of Cain's line falling apart into sin and depravity and chaos, right? This is why after Seth, it says, at that time people began to call on the name of the Lord. We know, like just by the years, Seth's son is probably around before Lamech is around, bragging about his sin. But the story is told to us in such a way that we get Cain's line, and then Seth's line starts, and it says, then people called on the name of the Lord, which means nobody in Cain's line is doing it. Nobody in Cain's line is calling on the name of God, right? Even though those people are coming after Enosh here, the way the story is told tells us Seth's line is calling on the name of the Lord, and Cain's line is not, right? Okay, let's look at 5, which is actually where we were supposed to start today, so we're falling apart. Adam lived, here we go, 130 years. He fathered a son in his own likeness and named him Seth. Why is it not popping up? The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800, and he had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. The genealogy goes through Seth, even though Cain has children and Cain is born first. It's very clear, the numbers, that Adam lived 930 years and then he died. I'm confused about what that means, because when are we starting counting? Does it mean that 930 years before he died, he was exiled from the garden? Or 930 years before he died, he was formed out of the dirt? Right? When does the clock start? I think we talked about this on Tuesday, but is the clock running when Adam and Eve are in the garden in perfect relationship with God? I would probably argue no, because there's no decay, right? Time is marked by decay. And so I don't know. It very clearly is not concerned with our ponderings, but I'm not sure. Did you have something?
Oh, no.
I would assume it was once they were exiled from the garden, because then that's, I guess, when they're introduced to what death even is, because
Right.
they're immortal before.
What's the point of keeping track of the calendar?
Yeah.
If every day is the same and it's all great, right?
Well, then what would that mean for each day? Like, what would that mean for the creation story of one day we did this, and next day we did
That's
this?
true. That's good. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, they said, he said, if you eat of the fruit, you will die. So here, they're marking that he did die. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so,
Which is supposed to, for us to be the trigger of, oh, this is what God said would happen.
yeah.
This was not
Didn't happen
going
right
to
away,
happen.
didn't happen right away, but.
Right, but it happens. We also need to keep in mind, we're going to start this genealogy. It is not meant to chronologue the history. It is not meant to tell us so and so many years have passed since Eden, or so and so many years have passed since day one of creation. That is not the intent of giving us the dates. The intent here is to track the line from important person to important person. So here, we're going from Adam to who? Well, yeah, Adam to Seth, and then,
Enosh.
but how to ask the question? Who are we getting to? What's the point of this genealogy?
No, right?
Noah. It's connecting the two figures of the story, Adam and Noah. So we get this genealogy to put it in perspective, but we can all kind of recognize the genealogy is not intended to tell us, oh, this many years and months and days have passed between Adam and Noah. That's not the intent. We use that now to try to backdate to give Adam a date for, he was born on this day and it was a Tuesday. And that is not the intent at all. We see this in other genealogies, where the genealogies skip figures in order to make the numbers work out right, or in order to just indicate these were the important people in the line. And we're going to skip over all those schmucks who didn't do anything good for anybody, right? The line from Adam to Noah and the line from Noah to Abraham are the same number of people. It could be, you're right, there's one position that says that's because God is orchestrating the universe and is orchestrating everything that's happening in it, and therefore God is putting these people in every 10 generations, this heroic figure pops up. Noah is 10 generations away, and then Abraham is 10 generations away, and that's how God is doing it. Or it could be that the person recording the genealogy skips generations of unimportant men, they're all men, in order to get to the number 10. There were really 15 generations, but the author cut out 5 of them in order to get the number that's supposed to be more appealing to us as the audience. Does that make sense? We see authors do this later, where they will skip over characters, they'll skip over people, in order to get the number of the generation correct. Is that like setting off alarms for people? Does that seem really sketchy, or is that kosher? Seems half and half. It is all entirely within the culture, and it is all entirely acceptable. Nobody in the culture would see that and say, oh, you're being deceptive by skipping over these people in order to give us the right number. It's very much how they're all used to it. And so it seems like the audience would be, oh yeah, I mean, we all know that there were these other people, but we don't care about them. We want the story, the way that the story is supposed to be presented to us. We tend to have a problem with that because we use genealogies for very specific purposes. Oh, the great-great-grandson of President Polk is endorsing such and such a character for president this year. And we tend to eat that up because we think, oh, the genealogy is important, right? The dates are important, or whatever it is. And the ancient folks care more about the story. Good? Okay. There's this one verse, and everybody is all fascinated about it. So I wrote here in my notes, what? And there's several of those in this passage. Everybody wants to figure this out. Everybody wants to talk about this. There are pseudepigraphal books about Enoch, right? And they're floating around in the time of Jesus, stories about Enoch, stories that talk about, it describes more detail about the Nephilim. It describes about like the theological necessity of the flood. It talks about angels and demons and their fall from heaven. It gives like prophetic issuance about the Messiah. I mean, the book of Enoch, everybody loves the book of Enoch. We see in, is it Jude? Jude has this obscure passage where he talks about fighting over the body of Moses. You know what I'm talking about, anybody? In Jude 9, when the archangel Michael, contending with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses, he did not presume to pronounce a blasphemous judgment. As far as I know, that comes from the book of Enoch. Right, that idea that Michael and the devil are fighting over his body. It does not come from the Bible. The Bible does not tell us that. But Jude is you referencing something that is recorded in the book of Enoch. Not to say that everything in the book of Enoch is inspired. Jude is pulling this one passage. People are fascinated with this. I think it seems like the reason for this being here is to connect walking with God and not dying. Whereas before, rebellion against God leads to death. Here's a character who is walking with God and is not dying. The opposite being Lamech that we just saw, who's like living in sin in opposition to God and receiving the punishment. Okay? I don't know that the Bible is more interested in Enoch than what we get here, serving this purpose. We tend to be very interested in these sorts of things. We tend to super want to talk about like who are the Nephilim, and what does this mean that they're giants, and what is all, we get very caught up in it, and that does not seem to be what the Bible is interested in telling us. Questions about this? From Adam, we count 10 generations all the way to Noah, right? And again, 10 could be because God is orchestrating the universe and what's happening in it. Or it could be because this is the way the author wants to present the story to us. Here's the verse about the The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. We get this character Nimrod later in a couple chapters, who's called the same thing, a man of renown. Right? We have another euphemism for sexual relations, right? The sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children. It seems like by saying, instead of saying they knew the daughters of man, it seems like the relations are extramarital, maybe. But this is another, what? There's several theories about what's going on here. None of them are more or less satisfying. The main theory that everybody wants to talk about is that the sons of God are angels, probably demons, I guess fallen angels, who come to earth and marry or at least have sex with human women. And they give birth to half human, half angelic monsters, giants, right? Crazy big people, the Nephilim. And they're men of old, and they're gigantic people, and they're renowned because obviously they're super strong and big compared to everybody else. You know what I'm talking about? It seems very fantastic, right? It seems very mythological. And I don't know that that's what the text is saying. The argument that I have found most plausible is that sons of God and daughters of man just refers to people who are following God and people who are not following God, are intermarrying. In the same way that we see that happening in Israel, with God repeatedly telling the Israelites, you should not be marrying Canaanite women, because then you will abandon me. And then they go and marry Canaanite women, and then they abandon God, right? It seems like the same sort of thing. To take it a step further, it seems like sons of God are probably children in the line of Seth, and daughters of man are probably children in the line of Cain. The people who are walking with God under Seth, and the people who are walking as human beings apart from God under Cain. What it means that they were mighty men of old, men of renown, we don't really know. It could be that it's some sort of like, they're the people who belong to the government, like they're the tyrants, they're the people who are ruling and leading the nation, the world into the depravity that we see at the time of Noah. We don't really know. What I am interested in is what it means the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. How? I mean, what's like the famous thing that's coming in the next few verses? The flood. And the flood kills who? Everyone. So if the Nephilim are here in this time, and then the flood kills everybody, how are there Nephilim afterward? Right?
Well, how long is
Where
it
are
between
they
this
now?
and the flood?
I mean, the text seems to indicate we've gone through from Adam to Noah, so now this is the time of Noah, right? The Nephilim are here at the time of Noah, and they're going to be here after the story. Go ahead.
Noah's sons' daughters, or wives. That's what.
But then wouldn't that imply that all of us, every human being is a Nephilim? We would all have the like angelic.
The line of Noah was pure, so it was Noah and his sons and his wife.
So like one of Noah's sons married a Nephilim person, snuck her on the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was told.
Could be. It could be very, very easily that this idea of Nephilim is not so much what we think of as like the genetics of it, but more the intermarrying and abandonment of God, right? Which does happen afterward a lot, right? Where people who are supposed to be following God, who are in the family that's supposed to be following God, end up intermarrying pagans, Gentiles, and going away with them into their worship of Astra or Baal or whoever, right? It could be that is what it's talking about. This issue of people who are rejecting God even though they're supposed to belong to the family is going to happen afterward.
Well, and if you read it, like sons of God are Seth and daughters of man are Cain, and then they bore people who became great warriors in some, you know, this idea of great warriorship, which, you know, if we're gonna talk breeding, you can kind of go, okay, well, this one's better big, that one's big, we're gonna put them together, these ones big, you know, I mean, it becomes this cultural idea that great warriorship becomes.
Yeah.
You know, it would almost support that then, when you say later men of renown, is almost like, does warriorship become their god?
We see this idea of the Nephilim pop up again, I think it's in Joshua, when they go and spy in Canaan. The spies come back and say, y'all, they got giants in there. They got Nephilim up in there. We cannot take it, right? Some people take that to mean like, oh, this is what it's talking about, the Nephilim survived. But it seems very clearly that they're like lying in Joshua. That is a false report. There's not really giants in Canaan. They just don't want to, they don't think they're capable of winning. And so they're lying to say, y'all, they got giants and we can't win this. Let's not do it, right? It doesn't seem like it's a genuine report of there are giants and this should be scary. Go ahead.
If they're like half human, half fallen angel, then wouldn't they kind of retreat to hell or whatever? Like, I don't, but also I've heard that like Goliath was a Nephilim because he was a giant.
I've heard that as well. I Googled that yesterday because I thought the same thing. And there's nothing in the text that tells us that at all. The origins seem very human for him. He was from Gath and he did this and that. And, but yeah, he's what, like 9 feet tall or something. We just don't, we have no idea. The other argument is they survive because the flood is not global, which is where we're going to get to in the next few verses. Is that the flood is described in global terms, but you can describe things in global terms that are not literally global, right? That everybody in the whole town saw what you did. It doesn't mean everybody in the whole town saw what you did. It means that enough people saw it to testify about it to everybody else, right? Not everybody had eyes on the thing. We see this in the Old Testament where they use that sort of language, and we'll get into it. But that's the other argument is, this isn't, they would say this is a bloodline, and the bloodline survives, but the bloodline survives because the flood is isolated to Noah's whole world. Everybody that Noah knows, right? And not like 22 feet above Mount Everest, and the whole world is covered in water. Go ahead.
If it was like fallen angels with people, couldn't they just do it again after the flood?
And also Peter, and I guess Jesus as well, tells us angels aren't given in marriage.
Yeah.
Right? And so I guess some people would say, oh yeah, but they're not supposed to be given in marriage, and angels don't, but demons do because they don't listen to the rules anyway. But I think Jesus and Peter talk about it more in terms of like physicality. It's not that they're not allowed to be given in marriage. They can't be because they don't have bodies, right? The idea that spiritual beings are producing children with humans is a very mythological, I mean, that is Greek mythology written all over it. It's like Zeus comes down and rapes people and has half demigod babies, right? That happens all the time. I don't know that that's what this is talking about. It doesn't seem like it at all because we don't hear anything about angels coming down and doing these sorts of things at any point in time. If demons were doing this, why doesn't a demon just come and show up somewhere and set himself up as the king of such and such a nation, right? I mean, that seems like that would happen all the time, and it just doesn't. So, I'm not very sold on the idea of spiritual babies. Yeah. Have you guys seen the Noah movie?
Yeah,
with Emma Watson? The weird one, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember why it was weird? It was because they tried to make the Nephilim really cool. And they're like rock monsters or something.
Oh, yeah.
And in like the climactic scene when the flood starts, all of the people are trying to like rush onto the boat. And the Nephilim like show up as big rock monsters and fight off the hordes of people. And then the hordes of people kill the Nephilim. And then like they're released from their rock bodies and they become angels again and they float up to heaven. It is nonsense. It is very silly. But it's because people are so fascinated with these sorts of verses that they want something to be exciting about it. And I'm not sure that there's exciting stuff.
I didn't even notice that it was supposed to be Nephilim. When I was watching it, my dad had it on, and I immediately walked away after that because I was like, I don't even think that's biblical, but
Yeah.
he was saying like,
And then Noah
still-
tries to kill Emma Watson's baby.
Yeah, and I was like, what is
It's
this?
very strange.
It's such a I stopped. I couldn't even finish it. I was like, what in
It's
the
very
world
weird.
is this?
This all made me think about like this phrase that I heard where it's like don't scream where scripture like whispers or like
Yeah.
something like that, which is like
We want it to be really exciting.
we want it to be cool, but it's like that's
Yeah.
not like the intention. And I feel like you run into dangerous territory. I mean, we just saw with Cain. Like when you speculate like that,
Yeah.
where you're not supposed to be speculating, you end up doing great harm
Yeah.
to like the faith and other people.
So here's 6:5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth. Every intention of their thought, of his hearts, was only evil continually. Do we think this way about sin?
We should.
The people apart from Christ, the thoughts of their hearts are only evil continually. Meaning, they do nothing good. No thoughts that they have are good, ever. Right? Do we think that gravely about sin? I feel like we kind of should, follow your heart. It's like, no,
Yeah.
don't do that, because it says very clearly that your heart is not worthy of following, right? This seems to be where Paul gets his ideas of original sin, right? Paul is very grave about, you see it in Romans 3, of everything apart from faith is sin. And in Romans 3, he talks about their tongues are practice deceit, and their throats are open graves, and with their feet they're swift to shed blood, and they do all these things. There's no repentance. There's no vision of God in their eyes. Everything is corrupt. It seems to start here. So, in response to this, the Lord was sorry that he had made people, and it grieved him to his heart. We talked about this at the very beginning, I think, before class started. We see God do this a lot. People talk about this with Saul. God made Saul king. Saul was really bad at it, and it grieved God that he made Saul king. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that, given everything that happened, if God could go back in time, he would not have picked Saul? No, because I think all of us would say, like, God knew what was going to happen. So, in that sense, God does go back in time, right? He knows the results. So, talking about him being sorry and him grieving or him repenting, some translations instead of grieve say repent. We just have to deal with that and figure out what it's talking about, because the Bible very clearly and repeatedly tells us that God cannot change his mind. It is not in his nature. It's not that it's something that he can't do. It's an impossibility in the sense that it would break his character to do it. Right? People ask, like, could God make a stone that's too heavy for God to lift? I think theologically the answer is no, because doing that would break his character. It would be uncharacteristic of him, and God is faithful to his own character. Right? So changing his mind is unfaithful to his character. It's not something that he does. So what does this verse mean if he is incapable of changing his mind?
I think it just narratively serves to like point out that like the weight of like his grief and his sorrow like over the state of mankind. It's not that he wouldn't do it again, just that like, because again, we can never know like the mind of God, but
Right.
like if I try to think about it, like you create something, right? And you know, it's almost like when you have a kid, like you know that they're gonna mess up and like make mistakes and all these things, and like you know that like that's going to grieve you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean you regret, like maybe you regret like they did that, but
Yeah.
it's not like,
It reminds me of, in John, Jesus and Lazarus. Jesus gets the report that Lazarus is sick. And Jesus says, I'm not going to come. The sickness won't result in death. Right? It'll result in glory being given to God. And then what happens? Lazarus dies. Jesus knows when he's going to, what is it, Bethany? He knows what he is going to do. He knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. What does he do when he gets to the tomb? He weeps. It still saddens him. It still grieves him that this has happened, despite him knowing that in 5 minutes, Lazarus is going to come back from the dead. Right? So he can still feel the emotions, even though he knows what's going to happen. And, trying to figure out how to say it delicately, Jesus could have not let Lazarus die. We see this throughout the Gospels where people come and say, hey, so-and-so is sick, and Jesus just like snaps his fingers and says, okay, they're better now. Even though they're somewhere else in a different city, they're better now. Oh, what time did they get better? Oh, it's the exact time that Jesus said they'd get better, right? So Jesus could have done that because he loved Lazarus so much, but he went through the process in order to achieve something on the other end. Lazarus is raised from the dead, which brings glory to God in the immediate. But then what's the immediate response to Lazarus being raised from the dead? What do the authorities and rulers do now? They convene a meeting to say, because Jesus raised him from the dead, we have to kill Lazarus and Jesus.
Yeah, there's a pushback on that.
Jesus has to die because he raised Lazarus from the dead. In the story of John, Jesus doesn't get to the cross without Lazarus dying. Lazarus' resurrection is what leads them to arresting Jesus. So Lazarus' death leads to God's glory. And so it grieves Jesus that this is what's happening. It makes him sad. He cries. But it is entirely part of the narrative. Does that make sense how that relates? It seems like that's what's happening here. That God is not like changing his mind and wishing he would have done it better. It's more, it still can make him sad even though it's exactly what is happening. What he always knew was going to happen. Some would say what he planned would happen. Right? So all of that to say, when it says that he grieved, when he says that he repents, it does not mean what we think of when we grieve or when we repent. Some people look at this and say this is an anthropomorphization. We are applying human characteristics to God. We're used to anthropomorphization being like giving God eyes and arms and stuff like that when he doesn't really have them in reality. This is like emotional anthropomorphization. We're applying our own understanding of emotions to describe the actions that we see in God. God created people, but now he's destroying them. And from our perspective, it seems like he's changing his mind. So we're just going to write that he's changing his mind. Even though in reality, that's not really what's happening. We're giving our own view, our own description of what we see happening.
Yeah.
Good? Good. No matter how we understand that, God resolves to kill everything. Determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Why do the animals have to die? Because humans suck. Right? Humans are so bad, but why do all the animals have to die also? Right? All flesh seems to indicate the animals as well.
Well, I mean, for one, you can't take every single animal. I mean, God probably could have done something, I don't know, but like...
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking he could have created like a plague that infects humans and not anybody else, right?
Yeah.
There seem to be other ways that he could have wiped out just the humans. Go ahead.
Is the symbolism of like baptism almost?
Would the animals be baptized though?
No, just everything being wiped out and them starting new.
Yeah.
That's all, like, all I ever thought of was just like the idea of new. So he kept Noah and his family, and then he took 2 of each so that they could reproduce, like they could repopulate. So this idea of like he's just gonna destroy everything else but keep, like, I think in a way he thinks the animals are fine, but instead of saving every single one of them, he saves enough so that they can all repopulate. It's not like one of those things that necessarily like mattered as much, as long as they were able to still have them.
Except for the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs don't
No,
become
no dinosaurs. That's
Um,
another
If
topic.
you trace back to Adam's assignment in the garden, when God says he named all the animals, I mean, with the Hebrew significance of name, naming is so much more ascribing significance to in that context than we would call it.
and placing them in their order and their category.
Your Ted and your spot, you know, there's a significance to
Yep.
Adam's interaction with those animals even that begins in Eden.
Mhm.
And then you take that, you pull that out, and then you do have, now they're working the earth and they're shepherds, and so it becomes humans and everything that humanity signifies within themselves
Mhm.
has to be destroyed. I mean, there's this connection that's been started in Eden that fell, the connection fell.
But I don't think any of us would say that the animals are sinning,
No, but they're.
right? Because they're incapable of it.
I think the animals having to be destroyed is significant to the human, not to the animal.
Well, the animals are blemished, cause even for a sacrifice, they have to bring unblemished animals,
Mhm.
so.
Well, some are, some
I
aren't.
mean, it's not
Yeah.
specified that to every unblemished animal was what was on the ark, but I feel like
Yeah.
maybe it's signaling to their blemishes.
Well, when he says clean, it would not be blemished. There's supposed to be some.
Well, clean is a
blemishes in-
categorical distinction. We'll talk about that in a second. Notice, this is the first time that God speaks since he talked to Cain. So he's talking to Cain and punishing him. This is the next time that God speaks in the story. And he's resolving to himself. I guess here he's talking to Noah. And it is not.
And
Good.
the first thing they do when they
Right.
get off the ark is kill an animal.
Yeah. Let's keep going. God says he's going to bring floodwaters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, which is the breath of life under heaven, in which is the breath of life. Everything that's on earth shall die. It very clearly has a global flood in mind. Okay, so just to start that off. It is describing a global flood. Everything that is on earth shall die. Right? Seems categorical. This is what I was talking about a second ago. Comprehensive language can be used for limited situations in more poetic languages. We see this at other points in the Old Testament. We see this in Kings several times. We see this in different places where the comprehensive language is used for something that is actually more specific. What we need to kind of wrestle with is, does the text necessitate a global flood in order for us to believe that what it's saying is true? Right? Because all of us are starting from the position of the Bible is true and it's inspired by God. So the words that are here are intended to be here by the Holy Spirit. Right? Does it necessitate that we believe that the whole earth, the globe, is covered in water up to and above what we would say Mount Everest, right? Is the idea that we have the tallest point on earth, and it says that the tallest point was covered by 22 feet of water. Is that, is it necessary for us to envision that in order for this to be true? Some are saying yes and some are saying no. That's kind of the point of why I'm asking. Is some people take it where if you do not believe in a literal global flood, where there is water over every portion of the earth, then you don't believe that this is true. And there are some people who will say, no, you can get to the meaning of this by believing in a local flood, where we would say things like Noah's whole world was covered in water, right? And when I say it that way, all of us can kind of pick up on the euphemism, the meaning behind it, where when I say his whole world, I mean everything that he knows, not necessarily the physical third planet from the sun, right? We see this a lot with in Joshua, God makes the sun stand still, right? That is not technically true, right? Because we know that the earth revolves around the sun, and so if it appears that the sun is staying in the same position, it is not because the sun is standing still. It's because the earth has stopped rotating, right? We get the appearance, it seems to us that the earth is standing still, so we could write it and it is true, but in the reality of the world, that's not what's actually literally happening. Do you see the distinction? So it can still be true without it being literally what's happening. Is that kosher? A lot of people think that is too close to throwing out the whole Bible, right? Well, if you don't take this literally, then anything could be a metaphor, and then you don't have any leg to stand on for any of it, right? Particularly with the stuff before Genesis 11, we have to do this a lot. The Bible seems to be using metaphorical language, and we need to determine what's important. What is it that we have to believe in order for us to be able to say the Bible is true, right? This is something that all of us kind of have to wrestle with. I would say some of us are on more of the everything has to be literal, and I would say probably some of us need to have a little more grace with people who are more on the metaphorical side, and some of us are more on the metaphorical side, and we might need to I don't know, have a little more commitment, have a little more, well, God could do things that aren't explained by science, that aren't explained by like the laws of nature and physics as we understand them, right? Some of us might need to be more on that camp, right? Is all of that kosher? Is anybody like crying out in their spirits right now? Are we good? Okay. We have got to keep going. We are running out of time real quick. There's this interesting verse. God is commanding Noah and telling him to take 7 pairs of all the clean animals. We always picture 2 by 2. There's 2 elephants and there's 2 giraffes, and I've got kids, and so we've got Noah books, which is a horrifying story to tell my kids. But there's also 7 pairs of all the clean animals. What does this mean? Does this have any meaning at all to Noah? There's no distinction between clean and unclean animals at this point, right? Like that happens with Moses, right? The Mosaic law tells us what's clean and what's unclean. Animals that chew the cud and also have a split hoof, and animals that are in the water but live on land and whatever. Clean and unclean doesn't really mean anything to us, to him, right? So what is this verse supposed to mean?
We may just not get to know what was significant, there may have been conversation between God and all the people, starting with Adam.
Yeah.
That we don't know.
Yeah.
Very
Very possible.
Means that we don't need to know, but that Noah, obviously, if he's gonna get off the ark, and he's just worked really hard, and he's lived with a lot of smell, and a lot of bedlam, and a lot of chaos to get these animals to the other side of this flood.
Mm-hmm.
His nature's gonna be like, don't anybody hurt them, we just got them off, let's just clean the ark and give them some grass out there, and like, let's just get this done. But obviously there were animals, again, going back to the significance idea, with more significance, whether they were explained in the way that.
Yeah. I wonder if it's the later author who is saying, oh, it's interesting that Noah brought 7 sheep, but only 2 elephants. We, the later author knows, oh, it's because those are clean animals. Noah, maybe, had no idea these are clean and these are unclean. God is just telling him who to bring and how many. And then the later authors look back and say, oh, he's bringing on extra of the clean animals and not the other ones, right? We don't know. It could be that God is having these, secret communications with people. It wouldn't make sense to me for God to be laying down portions of the Mosaic law way early for certain people and not like announcing it the way that he does with Moses. But I think it's interesting that the author tells us there's extra of the clean animals. This is what we were talking about on Tuesday. In Genesis 9, this is after the flood. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. This is where we get into, we can eat meat now. It's not clear, but it seems like maybe this is already a practice, right? If Abel is a shepherd, what is the point of being a shepherd if you cannot eat any of the food that you're tending? What is the sacrifice that he offers to God? If he can't eat, is it just wool? Right? Like, is he just shearing the sheep and not eating any of them? And he's offering wool to God?
He also gave fat.
Right. So it seems like, cannibalism's not the right word, wow. Carnivorism has become a practice. And now it is a practice that is allowed. Before, it might not have been allowed, but it was practiced. I mean, you can picture all the sinners running around in Noah's time, just eating meat and having fun. Now it's allowed. He gives a limitation to say you can't eat stuff that's still attached to its blood, right? You have to drain the blood before you can eat it. But this is what we were talking about on Tuesday, so I thought we'd bring that up as relevance. We already talked about this for a second. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. How does this square with very Jesus-y things we can think of, like turn the other cheek, or pray for your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, bless them and don't curse them? How does that square with this? This seems to be very much, if one of you kills the other one, the rest of us are responsible to kill you, right? as a society, because you've killed someone made in God's image, you forfeit your life. And so it's our responsibility as a society to kill you.
It also sets a limit on what is a capital punishment type sin.
Okay?
Like, you stole it, so I killed you. So I'm okay with killing you because you stole it from me.
Right. Yeah.
What if Jesus' response, like his turn the other cheek would not be about your character and your relationship with God, while this is more so like kind of physical?
Mhm.
I feel like it would fall under that of like one is physical and one's spiritual, your character, how Jesus lived, the example he set.
I think we talked about this in our theology class, but does this mean we as a society, we as Christians in society who believe in these texts, support the death penalty for people who commit murder? Right? Because it says, well, you ended someone that was created in the image of God, so we as a society are responsible for killing you. Right? This is where it starts. This is where the ideas come from, starting here. So, I mean, we don't obviously have time to get into it. Here we go. Ham. So this is after the flood. I trust you all just read the story, so I don't have to read the flood story to you. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his brothers outside. And Noah awoke from his wine, he got drunk, not good, and knew what his youngest son had done to him. And he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." So this is the third, what? What's happening? What is all this that's going on right now? Does anybody have any idea what is going on right now?
So I looked into it because it was like super confusing to me. Like, what?
It's very
How
weird.
What did I just read?
Yeah.
Like, and so like, there's nothing saying like, you know, unbusiness happened other than him seeing his father naked, but it was more so the fact that he went and told his brothers, like as a way to like ridicule his father and
Yeah.
like bring disgrace upon him.
Mhm.
And so instead of his brothers taking part in that, you know, they covered their dad up. And so that's where the curse came to him, is because of the ridicule.
Did the curse come to him?
To his child.
Ham did it. Canaan gets cursed,
Oh.
right? So also, what?
Well, then,
Not fair.
I mean, doesn't that then say the curse is not ending with you, your line is
Uh-huh.
cursed?
Right?
So, that's the version that I always see of events, which is like, oh, it's Ham and his like disrespect or whatever. But then it says like when Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him. Yeah.
Right. There are various interpretations, ranging from he saw it, he went outside and made fun of his dad to his brothers, and his brother said, "You need to shut up. This is not okay."
Yeah.
He's protected all of us. He saved all of us. We're going to respect him and protect him. So that's kind of on one end. The far extreme end is that, yeah, Ham did something to his dad. I mean, like the most extreme is that Ham raped his dad while he was passed out. Some people will take it, a step away from that to say there was some sort of funny business, some sort of sexual, immoral something, but something that Noah could know when he wakes up. Something that Noah is now aware of now that he's awake. You could probably say Noah woke up from his wine, and then he's covered in a blanket. He goes and talks to Shem and Japheth, and they say, "Oh yeah, Ham told us you were naked. He was making fun of you. We put the blanket on." So then, in that sense, he knew what his youngest son had done, right? Yeah, scholars are split on what it actually means.
Well, and there's also the idea you could have raped Noah's wife, and she gets pregnant from that.
I don't know that we see anything to do with Noah's wife.
But
At
I was
least
just saying, in
this.
the encompassing of this is Noah,
Yeah.
his wife would have been a part of his tent and him,
Yeah, I don't know.
So Noah wakes up and she's going, "Do you know what your kid did?"
Yeah. I certainly don't get that from this.
I mean, I read that.
Because
I'm
it
not-
seems like Noah is alone because the brothers come in and put the blanket on.
Well, I mean,
Right.
I'm not saying that that's necessarily what I believe, I'm just saying
Sure.
that I've heard that as then kind of putting the blanket on him could even be, there were them.
Yeah.
Like, they're off limits to us, we are not engaging in this idea that they are within our limit.
So something sketchy happens. Ham is not cursed, right? Canaan is the one that cursed, unless I'm missing it. Canaan is the one that's cursed, and
Well, Ham is disgraced within the family,
well, sure.
but it would be more significant to carry it through on the line than to just say, you did something bad.
Yeah. So in this is 9:26. Noah says, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." So Noah is blessing Shem and Japheth to continue to belong to God, and cursing Canaan to be subject to them. This is, like you said, the lines of Canaan and Shem and Japheth, which does end up happening. The Canaanites do end up serving the Shemites and the Japhethites, right?
And if there's only a few of you, this is way more significant than there was if we're talking about living in a city of people.
Right. And we're going to end up talking about these developing into nations that are supposed to be subject to one another. Again, this is where we get the curse of Canaan is what leads to African subjugation. Because supposedly, if you in study Bibles and stuff, you get this nifty little map of where all the different descendants of Shem and Ham and Japheth go. And according to the theories, the Canaan folks, I guess not the Canaan folks, the Ham folks end up in Africa. They go south from wherever they are at this point. And the Shemites go this direction and the Japhethites go this direction. But the Ham contingency goes south and develops into the people of Africa. And therefore, they're cursed to be subject to all those beautiful white Shemites who live in Europe, right? Or whatever it is. Again, we would all, looking back, say, this is nonsense, right? That, like, it doesn't have anything to do with us subjugating the Africans to our will. But for hundreds of years, this is what people thought. They thought that's what this text was teaching. So we need to be aware of that. I particularly think about what sort of things do we believe that are cultural and not biblical? What sort of things do we assume are true? In the same way that for hundreds of years Christians assumed that this had to do with race and African slavery, right? Are there things that we believe in our text that the text is not saying, right? That culturally we think that's what it means, and we're just dead wrong on it, right? Let's look forward. Genesis 10 has all the descendants. I'm not going to deal with that. All the people, all the names. Shem is the one who matters, and we'll see that in 11:10. Shem is the one who we actually get the years. Shem lived this long and had a kid, and he lived this long and had a kid, and on and on and on. Shem's line, I guess we'll get to that in a second. So we'll take a stop in 11 and look at the Tower of Babel. When Noah comes out of the flood, God tells him, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And what do these folks do?
They stay together.
They stay together and build a city.
Yeah.
We're not going to fill the earth, we're going to make a name for ourselves.
Do
right?
we know who the they are?
No. The implication, and again, this is what we talked about with the flood, the implication that this is everyone. The implication is that this is the whole world. That every human person was involved in this, and this is what divorce
So this is
language
both
is.
lines, both lineages at this point, maybe.
That is what the text, the straight reading of the text would imply.
Okay.
Because if you've got people down here and people up there and people over here, and it's just these people over here who are building the tower, and God confuses their language, then the people that are over here would still have the same language. But since all the languages in the world are confused, it implies that everybody's here. But again, maybe it's doing the same thing where the comprehensive language is used to describe a particular event. Maybe the people here building the tower are a small group, but everybody ends up having their languages shuffled because of it. Even the people who weren't involved in this at all. We have no idea. They want to build a name for themselves. They are specifically not building a name for God. And they are doing this in a city. right? And cities are always bad, right? Where does Cain go once he kills Abel? He tries to find a city. He starts cities. Where does Lot go when he doesn't want to be with Abram anymore? He goes to a city, right? It is always negative. You're supposed to think of like the rural shepherds that are the ones who are important, and the cities are not. Hang on a
Doesn't it
second.
seem like that's, like, in both cases, I mean, God has told Cain, you're gonna be a wanderer and alone, and he goes to a city. Like,
Yeah.
I'm rejecting even God's declaration on, and it says, lest we be dispersed over the face of the earth after God has told them to go out. And so it's again in opposite, like, it's like we're determined not to do what he told us to do.
Right. So here's another example. The Lord came down to see the city. First, it's not true. It's not genuine. The Lord could see it, right? But it's also making fun of them. Because like they're trying to build a tower that will reach to the heavens, and the Lord can't even see it. He's got to come down there in order to, because it's so insignificant, right? So it's kind of making fun of it. It's kind of a joke.
Well, it also seems to
But
imply
then
that
we
his hands are not on the city.
we
Like,
keep going.
This is not me.
Hang on, because we're running out of time, so we gotta go through. So God, in order to prevent them from doing this, to make a name for themselves, He confuses their languages, which forces them to disperse. Therefore, the name was called what? The Tower of Babel, which is another joke, right? Because we use that for like babbling. That comes from this, right? And it's a joke even in Hebrew of their language being confused. And so the sentences here at the end in 11, 8, and 9 are tongue twisters in Hebrew because it's making fun of the way that they're doing this. It also seems to be that this is Babylon, right? That Babel is Babylon. And that is significant because, as we talked about last week, the stories are passed on forever for time and time again, and then they're actually recorded and collated and put together at a certain point in time. And a lot of people think it was put together while they're in exile in Babylon, right? And so while they're in exile in Babylon, they're producing this story talking about Babylon being the source of why we're all different, right? Why do we all have different languages? Why do we belong over there and they belong over here and whatever? It's because of you guys in Babylon having this great and big city in opposition to God, right? Subtle, I think. If you're in Babylon, you don't want to say stuff that like makes them mad and get you killed. But it's giving them, the people, context to understand where they are in relation to the world. That Babylon has always been there and has always been in opposition to God, right? We end with this. We already had 10 generations to get from Adam to Noah, right? If you recall back here, Adam down to Noah. Now we've got 10 more generations from Shem to Abram, or maybe from Noah to Terah, right? It's not really clear because there's 11 people in the generation. Shem is the one who's important, and it goes all the way down to Terah, which is where we leave the story off at the end of 11. We get this little intro to the story about Terah, which we will get into next week. But what's important is that Terah has 3 kids. One of them dies pretty quickly, and his family is kind of absorbed. So Abram ends up with Lot, which is his brother's son. He seems to be, because his brother is dead, Abram seems to have adopted Lot. He's his adopted son. So when we get into it next week, let's start with, because I think most of us will be reading it starting, tonight. Think of it in terms of, for Abram, when he's receiving promises from God, he does not have his own children. Who does he have? Lot, from the beginning of the story. So think in those terms when you're looking at the story with Abram and Lot, just to start us off for next week. It seems like, in Abram's mind, from the beginning, Lot is the descendant. Lot is the recipient of the blessings. Lot is the one through whom God is going to do these things. So look at that and see if it helps you to see tension between Abraham and Lot. as the story progresses. Thinking about Lot being the heir, the next in line. Good? Any questions on any of this? Alright, I will see you all on Tuesday.